Today we'll be taking a look at a movie that could only come from the mind of a Canadian. A French Canadian. Well, that explains that. Directed by Daniel Grew as his feature film directorial debut, 7 Days asks the question, have the Canadians gone too far? The movie begins with a man named Harvey waking up and watching Saturday morning cartoons in the form of CCTV footage depicting violent acts. What appears to be a robbery gone wrong results in a woman's life being taken so someone could steal a pack of 5 gum from the gas station. One gruesome act to the next, we're then introduced to a man named Bruno as he performs surgery at the hospital he works at, a subtle nod to the fact that he is actually a surgeon. We then see a glimpse of his home life with his wife Sylvie and daughter Jasmine as the day is just beginning for the girls. Bruno, being up all night playing around in someone's guts and not in the fun way, is feeling a bit tired and needs to take a nap, so when his daughter Jasmine asks if they can both go out to hand deliver her birthday invitations for next week, he declines, so she decides to head out on her own into the terrifying world which is also known as Canada. But just before she goes, Bruno ties a pink bow tie in her hair before retreating to his room to engage in some rather sinful acts with his wife. Tired, because 2 minutes of vigorous cardio is enough to put anyone to sleep, he falls asleep and wakes up later in the day, shortly followed by a young child at the door, dropping off Jasmine's homework because she never made it to school that day. Concerned that her daughter is skipping school to do hard drugs or something, they call the police, who then come out to the house to take down some basic information, before Bruno and the 2 officers head out to search the local area, where unfortunately they come across the lifeless remains of his daughter Jasmine. Laying in the grass, pale and covered in blood, her hands are bound with the very same pink bow tie that Bruno tied her hair with earlier that day, and her underwear has been removed from her body. Devastated and broken, a few days pass since the killing and brutal exploitation of Jasmine, and Harvey, who we see is actually a police detective who likes to spend his spare time watching wholesome family videos, calls Bruno to tell him they're pretty sure they've got the man responsible. Anthony Lemaire came up as a match to the DNA found at the scene, a man who's recently moved to the area but is known to the police due to being charged in a previous sexual assault case before being released due to lack of evidence. And if you think it's weird how I just had to pronounce that word, then blame YouTube. Bruno and Sylvie then watch on TV as they both see Anthony smile on camera as he's put into the back of the police car. Someone who clearly feels no remorse for the heinous acts that they've committed. Something which triggers Bruno into thinking he needs to do something about this because he hates it when people smile on TV. So due to his extreme hatred for smiles and also child rapists, he breaks into a secluded cabin in the woods before finding a shotgun on the property and deciding that this is the location he will use. Understanding that this is something that he's going to need help to pull off, Bruno enlists the help of a local handyman by offering him $20,000 to keep his mouth shut and to build a contraption for him at the cabin. Not only paying a handyman to help him, but also paying someone 10 grand to pick a lock for him due to the fact that he actually wants to get caught and get as many people involved as possible. But once everyone's on board with the plan, day 1 begins. Bruno is following the prisoner transport van that Anthony is in as it leaves the courthouse, when suddenly the van begins to swerve and pulls over at the side of the road. Bruno paid that man 10 grand to pick the lock for him so he could get inside and somehow drug the driver of the van. Appearing at the side of the road and telling his colleague that he's a doctor and that he can help, he lifts the man out to the side of the road before taking off and fleeing with the prisoner van. After arriving at the location where he's going to abandon the van and switch vehicles, like a true gentleman, his first interaction with Anthony plays out with him holding a rag of chloroform over his face before injecting him with a sedative. At the scene of the prisoner kidnapping, Harvey is immediately able to deduce that Bruno is the one behind the abduction due to him leaving his vehicle behind, as he's very clearly making no efforts to hide the fact that it's him. His only goal and motivation right now is to get his hands on Anthony by any means necessary, and after getting said hands on him, Anthony is taken to the cabin where we see what the handyman created for him. Bruno must be a fan of medieval history or something, as he has his very own functioning torture room. Lifting Anthony up by a winch attached to his arms, he attaches him to a rack so he can lay him on his back. And now he's got this funny looking naked Canadian man alone in a room with him, so his fun can begin. Eventually Anthony begins to wake up after taking an incredibly poorly timed nap, and Bruno simply sits at the bottom of the room as the man begins to frantically panic and ask why he's here. Bruno approaches him and just stares him in the eyes for a while, causing Anthony to realise that this must be the father of Jasmine, before he begins begging and pleading, saying that it wasn't him and that he's got the wrong guy. But knowing exactly who he is, without saying a word, Bruno casually and calmly picks up a sledgehammer before using it to shatter Anthony's knee. As he screams out in agonising pain, Bruno calmly sits back down and drinks his beer while watching his entertainment because this cabin has no Wi-Fi and he can't watch Netflix. After breaking his knee into multiple pieces, Bruno then ties a chain around Anthony's neck and forces him off the table and watches as he hobbles around in pain, trying to not fall to the floor, otherwise he'll start to hang. While Anthony bounces around like some kind of strange Canadian kangaroo, while he's begging for help and mercy, Bruno walks away, turns the lights off and closes the door, leaving him in there to try and stand in extreme suffering. And just as he saw Anthony smiling on the TV, Bruno sits down in the other room after a long hard day of non-consensual limb lengthening surgery and smiles to himself as he can hear the man's desperate groans. Day 2, and Bruno wakes Anthony up with a nice refreshing drink of urine straight from the source while he's restrained to the floor and unable to move. That's part of Bear Grylls 5 a day. He then applies pressure to his now slightly wet knee before kicking his leg out the way because he's trying to walk in that direction, and then giving him an extra kick, but this time to the face. Bruno heads outside and sees a recently deceased deer on the property, something which gives him the idea to feed Anthony. Not because Anthony is hungry, but because he wants to prolong this experience and to keep him alive to spend some time with his new best friend. Calling Sylvie, who by now knows that he's taken Anthony and has her phone tapped by the police, Bruno tells her that he shattered his knee into pieces before asking what she wants him to do to him next. But she responds by telling him that she just wants him to come home and stop this, which doesn't sound like a torture technique that I know of. Knowing that the detective is listening to their conversation, Bruno announces that he'll be turning himself in next Friday on Jasmine's birthday, but by then, Anthony will be dead. Attempting to relate to Bruno, Harvey tells him that he knows what he's feeling, as 6 months ago, his wife was killed in a robbery gone wrong. Kinda leaving out the part where he likes to repeatedly watch her death while eating a steak. After telling Bruno that the killer was caught and put in prison, Bruno asks him, "But is that enough to satisfy you?" And judging by the reaction of Harvey, you can see that he's clearly conflicted. He's a man of the law and his wife's killer is behind bars, but you know deep down inside that that's just not enough for him, and a part of him wishes that he could do what Bruno is doing. So in trying to relate to Bruno, Bruno has managed to make him relate to him. Thinking that maybe he should just end all of this, Bruno enters the room with the shotgun before sporadically firing it near Anthony to terrify him, and then proceeding to aim it directly at his face. But while he's contemplating pulling the trigger, he comes to the conclusion that he's just not done yet. Day 3, and while outside, Bruno notices that the animals have begun feasting on the corpse of the now rotting deer, so decides to cover the carcass with sticks to let the creature rest, as he's clearly not inherently a violent and gruesome man, instead a broken father who's been pushed to the edge in one of the most horrific ways possible, and has access to the man who's responsible for that. Eventually, Anthony decides to confess to what he did, in hopes that Bruno will just let him go and hand him over to the authorities, without realizing that he's actually just made things easier for him. All he's done is solidify the fact that Bruno was right to not pull the trigger. He feels justified in what he's doing now, and now has a dose of motivation to continue on with it. Raising him up by his arms, Bruno proceeds to repeatedly whip Anthony with a metal chain, taking out large chunks of flesh with every hit. And eventually, the pain is just simply too much for Anthony's body, and he passes out. Something which doesn't seem to deter Bruno in the slightest, as he continues to whip and punch, before giving the naughty little boy a slap for good measure. Bruno is slipping. He's gone from that calm and collected man with a plan to someone who can no longer contain his emotions, as he's trying to inflict pain on someone who can no longer feel it. Day 4, and Bruno's drinking has begun to escalate, but that doesn't seem to slow him down, as before he was a man with a purpose, and now he's a drunk man with a purpose. After heading outside to see that the deer has been uncovered and almost entirely eaten by animals, he decides to take it out into the middle of the lake on a boat and drop it in, so the creature can finally rest in peace. Or so we can stop smelling its stench. I'm not quite sure. Sorry, I don't speak Canadian. Watching the TV, Bruno sees that his wife Sylvie is being interviewed, and he watches on as she says that he's been driven mad by grief, and that's why he took Anthony. Something which he takes great offense to and calls her in a rage, because he was actually driven mad by her nagging. The police attempt to trace the call every time he speaks to Sylvie on the phone, and this time they've managed to narrow it down to a general location, but nowhere specific. And after having a nice pleasant conversation with his wife, he then attaches Anthony to the rack again, as he's prepared the room for surgery. Not sure why he needs to perform surgery on the room, but whatever. Bruno shows Anthony a bottle of paralyzing poison, and due to my medical expertise acquired from Google, it will completely paralyze his motor system, stopping him from being able to move, but keeping him completely conscious and able to feel absolutely everything that's about to happen to him. So Bruno injects the substance into Anthony's IV, and he falls still after making some weird French noises. Applying a respirator to Anthony, because he wouldn't want him dying during his incredibly important procedure, Bruno takes a scalpel and a picture of his daughter, before showing comparing both of them to Anthony. If he thought before that he was paying for what he did, well, he was wrong. He's about to find out now just how badly he messed up. Lying there and motionless, but entirely conscious and able to feel everything, Bruno begins his incision and creates an extra pocket in Anthony's side in case he wants to store any of his extra things. Once Bruno is in, he clasps the wound open with a vice in order to see directly into Anthony's soul. And by directly into Anthony's soul, I mean directly into Anthony's colon, as he then thrusts his hand inside the wound and begins rummaging around before pulling out the man's colon. Day 5, and Bruno is done creating modern art but with the human body, when he suddenly hears the screams of Anthony as the paralysis has worn off. Heading into the room to check that his patient is having a speedy recovery, we learn that Bruno had pulled out his colon and attached it to the side of his body, as he's now forced to defecate out of a hole in the side of his own stomach. Well, that's a situation. By this point, Bruno has begun struggling with his actions again and has started drinking heavily to deal with the weight of his own emotions. But Anthony, being the lovely kind of person that he is, once again makes the decision incredibly easy for Bruno, just as he begins questioning what it is that he's really doing. Hoping by saying this that Bruno will just put him out of his misery in a fit of rage, Anthony goes from begging for his life to taunting Bruno as he tells him his daughter wasn't the only one. He's assaulted and killed 3 others previously before proceeding to list off their names. Diabolically, he tells Bruno that Jasmine was his favourite and that she deserved everything that she got, and then some. And in a frenzied rage, almost giving Anthony what he wants, Bruno begins to deny the man air, but stops after realising that's what he's trying to do. He wants his suffering to end, but Bruno has pathological demand avoidance, and now it must continue. So after giving Anthony a nice gentle neck massage, Bruno sits outside to take in some of that natural landscape, and notices that the decaying deer has made its way back to him, as no matter what, he's simply unable to escape this world of sadness, death and decay that he himself is contributing to. Calling Harvey again to once again ask him if he's satisfied that his wife's killer is in prison, the police manage to trace the call. But being one step ahead of them, Bruno has placed the laptop at a different address and has been remotely connecting to it in order to make it appear that the calls are coming from that address. Being thwarted by a nerd with a laptop, the police begin tracing where the remote access was coming from, which once again leads them to an empty location with another laptop and a phone. He's been going to that address and then spoofing it as the other address to give himself a buffer between him and the police, while never calling from his main base of operations. And on his way back to the cabin from that address, he passes a group of police cars as they make their way to the second laptop and stops at a petrol station for some fuel and beer. But while there, the cashier proceeds to look at him a bit funny, as if he's got something on his face or just smells a bit weird. But once he approaches her to pay, she tells him that she knows who he is, but she's with him because the only good is a dead Day 6, and it's approaching what would have been Jasmine's birthday, and Bruno was called up a TV station to tell them about Anthony's confession and the names of the other 3 little girls, where he then sees an interview from some of the parents, as they say they approve of what Bruno is doing, and they want him to make Anthony suffer. But after speaking to another mother, he's shocked to hear her say that she disagrees with what he's doing, and that what she's been doing to cope is pretending that the killer simply doesn't exist, when the killer in fact simply does exist. So in retaliation for her saying that, and evermore slipping Bruno contributing to his own downfall, goes to her house and chloroforms her, because how dare women have their own opinions. He takes her to the cabin to prove that Anthony does exist. Well, at least for now anyway. He forces her to see Anthony, and shows her that he's cut off his genitals because he doesn't deserve to keep them. He gives her the sledgehammer and locks her in a room with Mr. Nopeen, before coming back later to see that she hasn't done anything to him and has been sitting in the corner this entire time. She'd been repressing her memories of what happened to her daughter, and by bringing her here, Bruno has shattered her illusion, with it feeling like her daughter has been taken from her all over again. She tells him that every time he harms Anthony, he's killing Jasmine, and he responds to this news by punching her in the face and knocking her unconscious because she looked like she could really use a nap. He drops her unconscious body off in a pile of rubbish somewhere before driving away and leaving her there to make friends with the flies. After drunkenly returning to the cabin, he sits in the room with Anthony next to the shotgun before getting up in a drunken, grief-filled rage, where he proceeds to violently trash the room that Anthony's in, as he barely clings to life while tied to the floor. And after he's done showing that room who's boss, he stumbles out of the room and falls directly onto his face. Day 7, and it's finally Jasmine's birthday, the day that Bruno said he would hand himself in, after Anthony was killed. With Anthony still alive and Bruno yet to hand himself in, using information from the kidnapped woman, the police are able to narrow down their search even more as they're getting closer and closer to him. And in a delirious state, Bruno wanders through the cabin before seeing his little girl standing there with a pale face, cuffed hands, and the same clothes that she was killed in. He takes her to the bathroom to clean her up, but no matter how many times he tries, the blood keeps reappearing. After having one final interaction with his girl, he realizes that she's gone, and no matter what he does, she isn't coming back. Feeling lost and defeated, he unlocks Anthony's cuffs and sits on the floor beside him before seeing what the barrel of a shotgun tastes like. But while all of this is happening, the police have been able to locate the car that he drunkenly parked last night, leading them directly towards the cabin. After they surround it for one of the best surprise parties ever, Harvey calls out to Bruno over a loudspeaker and tells him to surrender and come outside. And after a short while of nothing but silence, eventually Bruno emerges as his 7 days are finally done. And as he's being cuffed and arrested, he tells Harvey that he didn't kill him and Anthony is still alive in the house, even though he probably wishes that he wasn't. So before this video comes to an end, I'd like to just give a massive shout out and a big thank you to all of the YouTube members and patrons, the people who every month continue to go out of their way to help support the channel, something which I greatly appreciate and I'm incredibly thankful for. If you're interested in becoming a YouTube member or a patron yourself, not only are you just generally being a great help to the channel, but you also get access to a few little cool perks, like being able to join the private Discord server, where you then get links to all uncensored versions of videos going forward. So starting off with the latest YouTube member signups, a big thank you to Jasper875, Marcelli Kenji Noda, TXC0, Cleo Sangelo, James Gunn, Giovanni Rossi, Resident Alligator, Nikki Shohan, Jonas Hurst, John, Blood Eagle, Liberty Rave, David J, Heathen, Orion Wilkerson, Laughable Genius, Waluigi, Mr. Smiles, Guatin, Dylan, Mob, Yuppets Vibe, Zaza Lord, Reek1, The Soldier 420, Jesse Holcomb, Di, Dan McCarty, Shaylee, Sir Dominic, Matthew Green, James, Rashomon, Oscar FN, Caleb, Lika Nagoita, Luca Guarneri, Gremlin Absolute, Zane Monroe, Keegan Neely, BL Doss, Sam Rostang, Ashley Taylor, Vayento, Angelo is the One, Tibbs, KG, Mudazar, Pineapple, Austin Clark, Philip Lissenfield, Difficulty Spike, JT Jar, Ridley01, Praz, Lassie Tykbeer, Javi Lazada, Pentashurikens, Hakura Harake, KST, The Last Final Girl on the Left, The La Yurad 1, GOJJ, Kenneth Vision, B4 Still, Irvin Kulin, Scorpy, Travasta 100, B Moose, Pacey02, Seeker, Dan, Curtis Richardson, Sermakova Barbora, Elizabeth Connor, Bo, Justin Perry, Mr. FPS, Vinny Venom, Alan Askia, Raphael Muller, Riley Jane, Kristen Eriksdottir, and Ann Johnson. Now heading over for the latest Patreon signups, a massive thank you to Amir Sanders, Fernando Rodriguez, Robert White, Sean M, Chocolate Cheeks, Kenzen, Matteo Maserati, Daddy Baker, Harvey Tube, Naomi Juarez, Diane Mama, Dre McQueen, Javi Lazada, Nate Nelson, Rickard Nielsen, Miranda Jackson, Marion Cami's Channel, Crazy Shark 8000, Noxus, Acro Spurge, Sebastian Gress, Rock 1138, Linus Dingus, Jacob, Ryland Stevens, Austin, Litboy, King Brit 1991, Sean Cleary, Ian Matter, Saijamu, Cohen, Asa Elite, Ace of Spades, Brandon Wack, Long Kidney, William Bridger, Zandu Gulhan, Valeri Matterman, Michael Centracelli, Medi Sidri, Falling Carcass 23, Cameron Jenkins, Taylor Nelson, Noah, Carson Cornish, Nah Nobody, Justin Dungan, The Turtle House, Roma Division, Effin Grimm, Macboy 700 Onion, Nicholas, Sylville Lim, Elliot Tamala, Honey Bunny, Nicholas Dowdy, Alexander, An Evil Waffle, Hangry, Native 209, Mario Balotelli, It GGG, Hannah, Eli Lynn, Luis A. Medina, Gray 8059, Kyle O'Dwyer, Atkasha Mohan, Claire, Nimbus, Passy McHale, Wanda, Alex, Josip Baganak, Caden Duffin, Willie Boy T, Drain Baton, Christian Oy, Zach Fox, Ethan Neal, C. Phil, Ismir Mayer, Sindre, John Jessen, Brody, DBH X Spartan, Bruce Lee, Raven19, and Block. So once again, a big shout out to all of the YouTube members and patrons, and a big thank you to everyone else for watching.